dangers that this development presented. He simply needed to pull troops out of the line and send them to meet this new threat. One of the formations ordered out was the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. The moves did not begin straight away, however, and when they did, only some divisions were moved. This new development meant that Hitler was faced with the one situation he had tried to avoid from the moment his troops had crossed the Polish border in 1939. A war on two fronts. From this point onwards, the war would not be fought on Hitler's terms, but on the terms of his enemies, who were growing stronger with each passing day. From now on, they decided where the next battle would be fought. This left Hitler powerless to do anything but move his decreasing forces to meet each new threat. On the 13th of July, the Russians began their probing attacks in the sector north of Orel. By this stage, Model's forces had created their own bulge that was flanked on both sides by strong Russian formations. These probing attacks gained momentum, and by the 16th of July had turned into an all-out counter-offensive. The Germans had not prepared any defensive positions in these areas and could not hold the Russian attacks. The Russians were fighting over familiar ground and had the benefit of being able to use their rested formations from the Bryansk and Western fronts. They steadily pushed Model's 9th Army back in the north to the Hagen defensive line. And by the end of the first week in August 1943, the town of Orel was back in Russian hands. Around this time, the counter-offensive in the southern area was gaining momentum and also regaining lost ground at a steady pace. By the end of August, Kharkov would come under Russian control for the final time. The Russian advances, although steady, were not easy. The Germans defended resolutely and exacted a heavy toll on the advancing enemy troops. The Russians, however, could replace their losses and relentlessly pushed ahead. They had scented victory, and the ultimate defeat of the enemy was becoming an ever-increasing possibility. One of the main purposes of the Citadel offensive was to straighten the line for the Germans and free up much-needed troops for the Allied invasion expected in the near future. By the end of August 1943, the front line had been straightened. The only problem for Hitler was that it was 100 miles in favor of Stalin's troops. Further key divisions had been taken out of the area in an attempt to deal with the situations developing elsewhere. The Russian front had become little more than a holding action, where each new threat had to be countered in the best way possible. The rotten edifice that Hitler spoke of in his planning of Barbarossa was a fantasy. The reality was a strong and determined country that would swallow millions of his troops in the titanic battles that raged from June 1941 to May 1945. Battles that ended at the very doors of Hitler's bunker in Berlin. Hitler had placed everything on one last throw of the dice. The gamble would ultimately mean the end for his beloved fatherland and divide the rest of Europe, for 45 years.